In one of the remote corners of Africa, among dense jungles and high mountains, there was a small village. Here, life went on as usual, following ancient traditions and beliefs. People lived in harmony with nature, revered the spirits of their ancestors, and feared the wrath of the gods, which they believed could descend on their lands at any moment. This village was surrounded by dense forests and a snaking river, deep and mighty. The river was considered sacred, and people believed that water spirits lived in its depths, powerful mermaids who could both bless and curse a person. Village elders often told stories about those who dared to disturb the peace of the river, and about the terrible punishments that befell them. There was a young woman named Amara who lived in this village. She was known for her beauty, but fate was not merciful to her. At an early age, she lost her parents, and soon after that she married a hunter who was the only breadwinner in the family. But the happiness did not last long. Her husband died hunting, leaving her a widow with a young son in her arms. Amara named her son Bakari, which in the local language meant promise. She saw in him all that was left of her dead husband, and hoped that the boy would grow up and become strong like his father. But fate was inexorable. Misfortunes befell the village. Drought, crop failures, and diseases plunged the village into despair. Many have begun to believe that one of them is cursed, and because of this, the spirits of the ancestors and the river are angry. There were rumors that little Bakari was the cause of all the troubles. It was said that an evil spirit lived in him, which attracted misfortunes. Amara did not believe these rumors, but she saw how people were starting to turn away from her and her son. Her heart ached when she saw how the other children who used to play with Bakari now avoided him, and the women who were once friends with her averted their eyes. One evening, as the sun began to sink below the horizon, Amara left her hut and headed for the river. Bakari, exhausted after a long day, was sleeping against her chest. Amara walked, struggling with the conflicting feelings that tore at her soul. She understood that if she left Bakari, she could save him from evil tongues and suspicions, but at the same time she could not imagine her life without him. When she reached the river, she was met by an old man, an elder of the village named Kefe. He stood on the shore and looked at the water, as if he knew that someone was coming.
Amara,
he said without turning his head.
What are you doing here at this hour?
Amara's voice trembled. She tried not to cry.
I do not know what to do, Kefe. Everyone thinks Bakari will bring trouble. I'm afraid for him.
The old man turned his wise, wrinkled face to her, in which kindness and understanding shone.
I know it's hard when the whole village turns away,
he said softly.
But you have to understand, Amara, that fear is a shadow. It can be bigger and stronger than reality. People are afraid of what they don't understand.
But what should I do? What is it?
She asked desperately.
I can't leave him, but if I don't, he'll be killed or exiled.
Kefe came closer and put his hand on her shoulder.
Listen,
he said. Eh?
I know a place where you can take a child. River. It can be not only a punishment, but also a salvation. The spirits of the river can accept him, and then he will be under their protection.
Are you telling me to throw my son into the river?
Amara whispered, feeling an icy wave of fear sweep over her heart.
It's a hard decision.
The old man nodded.
But sometimes, in order to protect those we love, we have to make sacrifices. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. But know one thing, if Bakari really carries something special, the spirits of the river will feel it and perhaps save him. And if not, then he will find peace among his ancestors.
Amara was silent. She looked at her son, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. His face was so serene, so innocent, that the thought of leaving him here in this cold river seemed unthinkable to her. But she knew that he was in danger in the village, and if something happened, she would never forgive herself. Finally, gathering her courage, Amara went to the water. She looked up at the sky, where the first stars were already lighting up, and said a short prayer. Then she slowly lowered Bakari into the water, letting the current carry him away. Tears were streaming down her face, but she did not allow herself to burst into tears.
Forgive me, my son,
she whispered, standing on the shore.
I love you more than life, and that's why I'm letting you go.
Kefi stood silently by, watching the boy being carried away by the current.
Whatever happens, Amara,
he said,
Know that you did everything you could to save him.
Amara didn't answer. Her heart was bursting with pain and fear, but she knew she had no choice. She slowly turned around and, without looking back, walked back to the village, leaving behind a part of her soul. A few minutes passed, and Kefi also left. The water murmured softly, as if whispering ancient incantations. In the distance, under the cover of night, something moved in the depths of the river, taking a new guest into its arms. The night in the African village was quiet and silent, like a premonition of something terrible. There was tension in the air, and the thick darkness seemed dense, as if you could touch it with your hand. Only a faint wind stirred the leaves of the trees, and restless cicadas broke the oppressive silence. Amara, trembling with excitement and fear, stood on the riverbank. In her arms, wrapped in a thin cloth, her little son, Bakari, was sleeping. He was so calm, so innocent, that it broke her heart to think about what she was going to do. But a determined plan was already maturing inside her, and she knew there was no turning back. Amara tried to look at her son's face, but her eyes were blurred with tears. She knew that this might be the last time she would see him, the last time she feels his warmth, his soft hair touching her hand. But in her mind, Elder Kefi's words were clearly heard: the spirits of the river can accept him, and then he will be under their protection. If there is something special about him. Those words were her only hope, her only solace in the terror she felt.
I'm sorry, my boy,
Amara whispered, her voice barely audible in the silence of the night.
I'm doing this for you. You deserve a better life than I can give you. If fate is merciful, you will survive, and if not...
She couldn't finish the sentence. Her voice broke, and she pressed her lips together to keep from screaming in pain. But the thought of his future, full of suffering and hatred, forced her to take a decisive step forward. The river flowed slowly and powerfully in front of her, pitch black, reflecting the light of the stars on its surface. Amara knew that this place was sacred, that the river took those whom fate chose for itself. But the choice was not made by her, but by fate, which she could not change. She walked to the very edge, so close that she could feel the cold water washing over her bare feet. Her breathing became ragged, and her heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it was about to burst out of her chest. At that moment, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Kefe. As if sensing her intentions, he came to support her at the most terrible moment.
Are you really ready to do this? Amara, what is it?
He asked, his voice calm, but there was a deep concern in it.
I have no other choice,
she replied without turning her head.
I can't let him suffer. I just can't.
Kefe slowly walked up to her and stood next to her, his gaze fixed on the dark water.
Remember that the river does not just take away, it also gives. If the spirits decide that his time has not come yet, they can bring him back. You have to believe that, Amara.
She nodded, but her hands were shaking as she began to lower Bakari down, closer to the water. His little body was so light, so fragile, that she was afraid that if she let him go, he would disappear into the cold depths forever.
I will love you forever, my boy,
she whispered, closing her eyes so as not to see the horror that her actions could bring.
Please, spirits, protect him if he is worthy of your mercy.
Kefi was standing next to her, his hands lightly touching her shoulder, as if he was trying to transfer his strength to her. But he knew that in this moment she was alone, just her and her son, and the choice she was making.
Let him go, Amara,
he said softly.
Trust the river. Trust in fate.
She froze for a moment, and at that moment it seemed to her that the whole world had stopped. Then, with a deep sigh, she released her fingers, allowing her son to slide into the water. His body slowly sank into the river, and Amara felt a chill run through her heart. Bakari quietly drifted away with the current, as if the river itself had taken him away, and Amara stood on the shore, numb with grief and fear. She could no longer hold back the tears that burned her cheeks.
What have I done?
She whispered, falling to her knees and covering her face with her hands.
You did what you had to do,
Kefi said, his voice full of compassion.
You gave him a chance that others would have taken away from him.
But Amara couldn't be comforted. Her son disappeared into the darkness, and with him disappeared her last hope.
What now, Kefi? What will happen next? What is it?
She asked, her voice filled with despair. he said, lifting her to her feet.
We have to go back to the village and wait. If the spirits are merciful, you will see your son again. And if not, you'll have to accept it as the will of the gods.
Amara knew that now she could only wait. She left the riverbank, leaving behind a void that no prayer, no consolation could fill. The river took her son, and only time will tell if he will come back. The current of the river, cold and powerful, picked up little Bakari as soon as his body touched the water. It seemed that the river, this ancient and unchanging guardian of the African lands, had long been ready to take him into its arms. The stream carried the boy further and further away from the place where his mother, with tears in her eyes, left him at the mercy of the spirits. The water was cold, penetrating to the bone, but Bakari did not wake up. He lay on the surface as if immersed in a deep, peaceful sleep. The waves gently hugged him, hiding his small body beneath them, as if trying to hide him from the outside world. Gradually, the current slowed down, and the water around him darkened, as if the night had sunk to the bottom of the river. Lights began to twinkle among the dark waters, blue, green, silver. These strange glowing creatures, like small stars, circled around Bakari, illuminating his path, as if they were leading him to a place where he would be safe. Soon, the surface of the water began to lose its usual transparency, becoming thick, almost viscous. Bakari gradually began to sink into the depths, but the current was already carrying him so fast. Everything slowed down, as if time itself had decided to surrender to the will of this underwater world. The boy was enveloped in darkness, but it was not a frightening, hopeless darkness, but rather a comforting one, hiding everything unnecessary, leaving only peace. Suddenly, silhouettes began to appear around him, as if woven from the very fabric of water. They were streamlined, with long flowing lines resembling the bodies of women, but endowed with a grace and fluidity that no mortal being could achieve. They were mermaids, creatures that people told legends about, but which only a few mortals had seen with their own eyes. Their hair, long and silky, floated in the water like dark algae framing their faces. The eyes, large and luminous, reflected the full depth of their underwater world, and the skin, pale, almost translucent, shimmered in the light of those mysterious lights that accompanied the boy. Their lips were curved in a soft, barely noticeable smile, full of silent wisdom and sadness accumulated over centuries of existence underwater. One of the mermaids, the oldest among them, approached Bakari and gently picked him up in her arms. Her touch was gentle, like the light touch of water, and at the same time strong, like the power of the river itself. The boy slowly opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, just a warm, soothing concern. She held him like a precious treasure, and the other mermaids surrounded them, forming a circle that seemed to protect Bakari from the outside world. They silently communicated with each other, using a language that only they understood, merging with the water, becoming a part of it. Their voices, barely distinguishable, were like the whisper of waves, quiet and soothing. These creatures were not just the guardians of the river, they were its soul, its heart. They knew all its secrets, all its depths, all the streams and whirlpools. Mermaids were part of the water. They existed in harmony with it, understanding its language and hearing its call. Each of them was connected with the river, but at the same time each was an individual, with its own history, its own destiny. The eldest mermaid, the one holding Bakari, was their leader. Her name, which only a few people knew, sounded like the song of the wind over the water. Kala. Kala was wise and ancient. She remembered the times when the world was different, when people and spirits lived closer to each other. She saw how the world was changing, how people were moving away from nature, and how their fear of the unknown grew, turning into hatred. But right now, all she cared about was this little boy who, by the will of fate, ended up in their world. She knew that he was special, that his appearance was not accidental. Kala saw in his eyes a light that could connect two worlds, the world of people and the world of spirits. She understood that his fate had not yet been decided, that he could become the one who would change the course of events, who would bring harmony where there was only disunity. Kala carefully brought Bakari closer to her and, rocking him slightly in her arms, began to sing. Her song was not audible to ordinary ears, but Bakari felt it in his soul. It was a melody full of sadness and hope, as ancient as the river itself. Kala's song lulled the boy to sleep, filling his mind and heart with a peace he had never known. Gradually, his eyelids began to droop again, and he fell asleep again, but this time it was a dream full of light and joy. When the boy fell asleep, Kala made a sign to the other mermaids, and they slowly began to sink into the depths of the river, carrying their little guest with them. Their movement was smooth and graceful, as if they were part of the flow itself. The water around them became more and more transparent, and soon they found themselves in the heart of the underwater world, hidden from human eyes. It was a world full of mysteries and wonders. There was no sun here, but the light still streamed from everywhere, soft and muted, like the reflection of the moon in water. Dense algae formed bizarre arches and grottos, in which mysterious creatures hid, sometimes flashing in the distance. The rocks, covered with moss and coral, served as a shelter for small fish that seemed to be playing hide and seek with mermaids. The water was cool, but not cold. It enveloped everything around, creating a feeling of complete peace and security. The mermaids carried Bakari through this underwater world until they reached a huge grotto surrounded by glowing algae. It was their sanctuary, a place where they gathered to communicate with the spirits of the river, where they made decisions that affected their entire community. Kala entered the grotto, holding the boy in her arms, and the other mermaids followed her. In the center of the grotto was a small altar decorated with shells and stones collected from the bottom of the river. Kala carefully placed Bakari on the altar, and all the mermaids gathered around him, continuing to sing their ancient songs, calling on the spirits of the river to bless this child. Songs filled the grotto, bouncing off its walls, and soon it seemed that the whole world vibrated with this melody. The water around the altar began to glow, and the light grew brighter until it filled the entire space of the grotto. It was a blessing given to the boy by the spirits of the river, who accepted him into their family, recognizing him as their own. When the lights finally went out, Bakari was no longer an ordinary child. His body, although still human, acquired a special lightness and flexibility, as if he had become part of the water. His breathing was slow and deep, and his eyes shone with ancient wisdom, which he seemed to have been endowed with through his connection with the spirits of the river. Kala, looking at him, realized that the boy had become a part of their world, that he was now connected to the river, with its spirits, and with everything that it symbolized. But she also knew that his time had not yet come, that he would have to return to the human world when he was ready. Until then, Bakari will stay with them, under the protection of the mermaids, who will protect him, teaching him ancient knowledge and wisdom that will help him in his future mission. Thus began a new chapter in the life of Bakari, a boy who was led by fate to the spirits of the river, so that one day he could return peace and harmony to a world where they had long been lost. Time flowed differently in the underwater world than on the surface. Day and night merged into one endless stream, which slowly but steadily changed everything around. The boy rescued by the mermaids was getting used to a new way of life. At first, everything around him seemed strange and incomprehensible, but every day he plunged deeper into this mysterious world, gradually becoming a part of it. The mermaids were his mentors, his friends, and his family. They taught him ancient traditions that were passed down from generation to generation and revealed to him secrets known only to the inhabitants of the depths. There was no world he was used to underwater. Everything here was subject to its own laws and rhythms, and in order to survive, Bakari had to learn from scratch. Kala, the eldest among the mermaids, took on the role of his mentor. She saw something special in the boy, something that set him apart from others. He was full of life and energy, and although his past was sad, it did not break him. Kala understood that one day he would have to return to the human world, but until his time came, she sought to teach him everything she knew herself.
Your journey will not be easy, Bakari,
Kala said one day, as they sat at the bottom of the river, surrounded by glowing algae.
in the world where you were born. Few people understand our customs and traditions. But you.
She looked at him warmly. You can connect these two worlds if you learn to listen to your heart and follow your inner light. Bakari listened attentively, his eyes, more expressive than before, reflecting the light coming from the algae. Deep down, he still felt connected to the world on the surface, but living among the mermaids had changed him. He learned to breathe underwater. His movements became light and graceful, as if he himself had become a part of the water.
I understand, Kala.
He replied, his voice low but confident. But how can I keep my humanity if I'm getting deeper into your world? What if I forget who I was? Kala smiled. Her face became soft and thoughtful.
You won't forget.
She said.
The fact that you are a human being will always be with you, like a shadow that follows you everywhere. But here, in the water, you can become something more. We mermaids, we don't just live in the river, we feel it, understand its soul. You can learn it too, but don't forget about your roots. This is your strength, Bakari.
Since then, Kala started teaching him water magic. It was an ancient science, accessible only to those who could connect with nature on a level inaccessible to most people. Water magic allowed mermaids to change the flow of rivers, control the seas, and even hear the thoughts of other creatures. Bakari gradually discovered this world for himself, studying every particle of it. One of the first lessons he learned was how to control the flow of water. The mermaids showed him how to feel the current, how to direct it at will. At first it seemed impossible, the water was so strong, so uncontrollable. But Kala patiently explained to him that water does not obey the force, it responds to harmony.
The water doesn't resist,
she said, as they stood in the middle of the undercurrent.
She's taking it. To control it, you have to become a part of it, feel its movement, its rhythm. Don't fight her, but follow her.
Bakari closed his eyes, concentrating on the feeling of the water around him. Her cool streams hugged his body, gently sliding over his skin. He tried to feel this rhythm, catch it and direct it. At first, nothing worked, the water remained out of control. But every day he realized more and more that the key to success lies in trust and calmness. Finally, after several weeks of hard training, Bakari felt the flow of water around him begin to yield to his will. At first it was a barely noticeable change in direction, then the water became obedient to his desires. He could control her movement, guiding her wherever he wanted. This feeling was both amazing and frightening. He felt the power hidden in every stream. One day, when Bakari was doing his training again, one of the young mermaids, Ilana, approached him. Her large eyes, reflecting the light of the algae, stared at him intently.
You're learning so fast, Bakari,
she said, her voice soft as the whisper of waves.
I've never seen anyone master water magic so quickly.
Bakari looked at her with a smile.
I guess it's because I've always loved water,
he replied.
Even when I was little, I could sit by the river for hours and watch its flow, and now I feel like I'm becoming a part of this world.
Ilana nodded, her long hair swaying in the water.
You have already become a part of our world, Bakari,
she said.
But unlike us, you remember what happened before. It makes you special. You are not just a person, and you are not just a part of the river. You are a bridge between two worlds.
Bakari was deeply moved by these words. He thought that one day he might have to return to the human world. But will he be able to live on Earth again after becoming a part of this underwater world? This question bothered him, but for now he decided to leave it for later. Bakari became more and more involved in the life of the mermaids every day. He studied their traditions, participated in their rituals, and even began to understand their sign language, which they used to communicate with each other when words were superfluous. He learned to create magical streams that could protect against enemies or, conversely, bring help to those in need. He soon became an integral part of their community, and even the oldest mermaids recognized him as one of their own. However, despite all this, Bakari could not forget about his human origin. The memory of the world where he was born still lived in his heart. He remembered his mother, her face, her tears when she left him on the riverbank. These memories were his anchor, the thing that connected him to the world on the surface. Sometimes, when he was alone, his mind would go back there, to his roots, to the days when he was just a little boy in an African village. One evening, when the entire mermaid community gathered for the ritual, Bakari felt that it was time to ask Kala a question that had been tormenting him for a long time. When the ritual was over and the mermaids began to disperse, he approached her.
Kala,
he began, his voice trembling with excitement.
Tell me, what awaits me in the future? I have become a part of your world, but I feel that something has to happen, something that will change everything.
Kala looked at him, her eyes full of wisdom and compassion.
The future is hidden from our eyes, Bakari,
she replied, her voice soft and soothing.
But I feel that your fate is connected not only with us, but also with the world on the surface. You have to be prepared for the fact that one day you will have to make a choice. But don't be afraid of it. Trust your heart, and it will lead you to the right decision.
These words left Bakari in deep thought. He understood that his life among the mermaids was temporary, that one day he would have to return to the human world. But until that moment came, he continued to study, absorbing knowledge and experience that one day could save not only him, but also those who are dear to him. As the days passed, Bakari became more and more a part of the underwater world, not forgetting his human origin. He continued to study water magic, train his abilities, and prepare for the day when he would have to return to the world where it all began. Bakari had been living among the mermaids for months, if not years. The underwater world, which at first seemed alien and incomprehensible to him, became his home, and the mermaids became his new family. They taught him the magic of water, ancient traditions that were passed down from generation to generation. He mastered their rituals, learned the secrets hidden in the depths of the river, and felt like a part of this world. But every day there was a growing unease in his soul that he could not understand or explain. It all started with one dream that haunted him every night. In this dream he saw himself standing on the riverbank, half submerged in water, half standing on land. In front of him stretched a bridge, ancient, dilapidated, leading into the unknown. The storm raged around him, the wind howled, raising waves, but the bridge remained unshakable. Bakari felt he had to cross it, but he couldn't bring himself to take the first step. At first he did not attach much importance to this dream, considering it just a figment of his imagination. But soon the dream began to repeat itself, becoming more distinct and frightening every night. Bakari felt that this was not just a vision, but something more, something that concerned his fate. Deep down, he understood that it was connected with his past, with what remained outside the underwater world. One day, when he was walking along the bottom of the river, looking at the ancient ruins hidden under the water, he came across something strange. Among the debris of rocks and driftwood, he noticed an old plaque covered with algae. It was made of an unknown material that had not been exposed to time and water. Bakari carefully cleaned it of dirt and saw that the plaque was engraved with symbols that he could not read. Returning to Kala, he showed her the find, hoping that she would be able to explain what it was. When Kala saw the sign, her face became serious and her eyes thoughtful. She took the tablet in her hands, and her fingers began to slide over the symbols, as if remembering long-forgotten words. Then, after a long silence, she told him about an ancient prophecy that concerned not only their world, but also the world of humans. The prophecy said that one day a man would be born who would become a bridge between two worlds, the world of people and the world of spirits. This person, being connected to both sides, will have to decide the fate of the two worlds, bring them to harmony or destruction. According to legend, this man will have unique abilities that will allow him to connect what seemed incongruous. Bakari listened to Kala, and with every word she said, his heart sank with anxiety. He understood that this prophecy was talking about him. Everything in his life pointed to this: his origins, his rescue by mermaids, his ability to understand and use water magic. He was the man who was supposed to fulfill the prophecy. But what did it mean to him? Should he return to the human world, which seemed so far away to him, or stay with the mermaids who became his family? This question bothered him. A conflict was raging in his heart, which was getting stronger every day. On the one hand, he felt his affection for the mermaids, for this underwater world that had become his home. He knew that he was loved and appreciated here, that he had become a part of something great and ancient. On the other hand, he could not forget about his past, about his mother, about the people who remained on the surface. He was human, and that part of him haunted him. Bakari began to notice that his vision was beginning to influence his behavior. He became detached, often going into solitude, trying to find answers to his questions. He felt that an invisible wall was beginning to appear between him and the mermaids, which separated him from them. It wasn't hostility or distrust, rather. It was the realization that he no longer belonged completely to any of the worlds. The mermaids, seeing his inner conflict, tried to help him, but they themselves did not know how. They understood that his fate was connected with something more than they could imagine. Kala, who had always been wise and insightful, began to spend more time thinking, trying to understand the meaning of the prophecy. She knew Bakari had to make a decision that would change everything, but she was afraid that this choice could destroy what they had created together. As time passed, the conflict within Bakari grew. He began to feel that his place was not here, but also not there, in the world of people. He found himself between two worlds, each of which pulled him in its own direction. On the one hand, he wanted to stay with the mermaids who saved him and taught him everything he knows. On the other hand, he felt a debt to his past, to his people who needed him. Bakari often returned to his vision of the bridge. Now he understood that this bridge symbolized his destiny, his role in this world. He was the bridge that was supposed to connect the two worlds, but he himself stood still, not knowing where to go. He was afraid to take a step because he didn't know what lay ahead. This fear of the unknown held him down, preventing him from making a decision. One day, when he was wandering along the bottom of the river again, trying to sort out his feelings, he came across another sign. This tablet was similar to the first one, but it depicted a man standing between two worlds. One was the world of water, the other was the world of fire. Bakari stared at this image for a long time, realizing that it reflected his own position. He was between two elements, between two worlds, and he had to choose which one he would live in. This plaque pushed him to an important decision. Bakari realized that he could not remain an indifferent observer. He must act, he must choose his own path. He realized that his destiny was not just to be a part of one of the worlds, but to connect them, to bring peace and harmony between them. He had to fulfill the prophecy, even if it meant sacrificing something important to himself. But this realization did not bring him peace. He still didn't know how to do it. He was afraid that his choice might lead to destruction rather than union. He was afraid that when he returned to the human world, he would lose touch with the mermaids, that they would see him as a traitor. But he couldn't stay among the mermaids, forgetting about his past. Bakari realized that his life would never be the same again. He had to accept his destiny, even if it meant that he would have to leave those who had become dear to him. His heart was torn by this internal conflict, but he knew that he could not escape from his fate. Thus began a new stage in Bakari's life. He knew that he had to make a difficult choice that would change everything. There was a storm raging in his soul, but he understood that this storm was part of his path. Now he had to decide how this path would end. Time passed unnoticed for Bakari, and the days among the mermaids turned into weeks, and then into months. He had managed to get used to underwater life, to its rhythms and laws, but more and more often his thoughts turned to the surface, to the world from which he came. An internal conflict tore him apart. On the one hand, he did not want to leave his rescuers and teachers, but on the other, he felt that his destiny lay beyond the underwater world. Bakari woke up one morning with a clear realization it was time to return. He felt that he could no longer delay the inevitable. His connection to the human world, which he tried to ignore, became stronger and stronger. In this world, he gained strength and knowledge, which now had to serve his people. Gathering his thoughts, he left his place among the mermaids and headed for the surface of the river. This journey was difficult for him, not physically, but emotionally. Every step took him further away from those who had become a new family for him. But Bakari understood that his journey would end not here, in the depths of the river, but on land, where he was born. When Bakari finally reached the surface, he had to take his first deep breath of air after so many months of living underwater. The air was cool and fresh, reminiscent of the days when he was still a child. There was anxiety in his heart, but with it was a sense of determination. He knew there was no turning back. Bakari was now a teenager, although it was clear in his eyes and on his face that he had seen more than any adult. His skin, which had become smoother and more luminous from living in the water, now stood out against the background of the surrounding landscape. His eyes became bright and deep, as if the river itself was reflected in them. His movements were light and graceful, like a creature accustomed to the flow of water. But the most important thing was that he gained new powers and knowledge that changed him forever. When he came ashore, he had to get used to a world that now seemed both familiar and alien. Everything was the same as before, the same trees, the same fields, the same sounds of nature. But Bakari felt like he was in a foreign land. He knew that he had changed, and now this world had to recognize him again. His return to land did not go unnoticed. The locals who lived next to the river were the first to notice his appearance. When they saw the teenager coming out of the water, they couldn't believe their eyes at first. The boy, who they thought had died a long time ago, returned, but not as he was remembered. Now he looked and behaved like a creature from legends. Rumors of Bakari's return spread through the village with incredible speed. People came from all sides to see him with their own eyes. They approached him cautiously, with awe and fear, as if they were afraid that he would disappear as suddenly as he appeared. Many were convinced that a spirit or prophet was standing in front of them, sent by the gods to deliver an important message. Bakari was silent, watching what was happening. He saw in people's eyes a mixture of curiosity, fear, and respect. His appearance alarmed them, but he felt he had to explain to them who he really was. However, he also understood that his story did not fit into the usual framework for them. How can you explain to people that he was raised by mermaids, creatures from a world that for most of them was just a myth? Soon, the elders of the village came to the place of his appearance. These wise people, on whose shoulders lay the responsibility for the fate of the village, watched Bakari with special attention. They saw in him not just a boy who had returned from the dead, but a being endowed with special powers. They did not know what to expect from his return, but they felt that this event foreshadowed a change. The elders surrounded Bakari and started asking him questions. They wanted to know where he had been all these years, what had happened to him, and why he had returned. But the more they questioned him, the more they realized that the answers he could give did not fit into their usual ideas about the world. Bakari, in turn, felt that his task was not to tell his story, but to help his people. He knew that his return was not an accident. He was called here to fulfill his mission, to become the bridge between the world of people and the world of spirits, which was mentioned in the prophecy. But he didn't know how to do it yet. In the following days and weeks, Bakari began to actively interact with the villagers. He attended elder meetings, observed how people lived, and studied their problems. He understood that his new experience and knowledge could help them, but he also realized that not everyone would be ready to accept him as he had become. At first, many people treated him with distrust and even fear. People did not understand what happened to the boy who returned from the river different. Some saw him as a threat, others as a savior. In his presence, they felt an inexplicable force that both attracted and frightened them. But gradually they began to get used to it, noticing that it not only does not harm, but also helps them. One day, when a drought began in the village, and the river, which had always been full, began to dry up, people turned to Bakari for help. They believed that he, as a messenger of spirits, would be able to return water to the river. Bakari accepted the challenge. He felt that this test was the first step towards fulfilling his destiny. He went to the river, where he spent a lot of time meditating and invoking the power that the mermaids had given him. He remembered everything he had been taught: how to listen to water, how to feel its movement, how to direct its flows. Gradually, his connection with the water became even stronger, and he began to control the flow of the river. The locals, watching his actions, were amazed. They saw how the river began to fill with water again as life returned to the arid lands. This strengthened their belief that Bakari really has special powers, and that he was sent to them for a reason. Every day, Bakari became more and more aware that his return to the surface was inevitable. He had to fulfill his mission, help people, and bring peace between the two worlds. But at the same time, he understood that his path was just beginning, and that new challenges awaited him ahead. Bakari accepted his fate, but did not forget that he was still a man, albeit with special powers. He began to actively participate in the life of the village, helping people and sharing his knowledge with them. People began to see him not only as a prophet, but also as their mentor, someone who could show them the way to a better life. So Bakari, a boy raised by mermaids, became an important figure in his village. He was the bridge between the human world and the spirit world, the one who could unite these two worlds. But he knew that his path did not end there, and that new challenges and discoveries awaited him ahead. Bakari's return to land caused a storm of emotions in the village. Some residents took it as a sign of blessing from the spirits of the river, while others, on the contrary, considered its appearance a bad omen. Conflicts between hope and fear began to flare up in the heart of the village, and it soon became clear that the peace Bakari wanted to bring would be difficult to achieve. At first, the villagers perceived Bakari as a mysterious and even frightening guest, but his actions began to convince many that he had special powers that could help the village. The successful return of water to the river and his ability to feel and control the elements of nature only strengthened faith in his unusual abilities. However, at the same time, the fear of his possible power and the fact that this power could bring not only good, but also destruction strengthened. There was a debate among the elders of the village about how to treat Bakari. Some believed that he should be accepted and allowed to help the village, seeing in him a savior sent by the gods. Others, on the contrary, insisted that he should be expelled before he brought disaster and misfortune. Views were divided, and this split the village into two camps. One of Bakari's most ardent opponents was an old village witch named Nagoma. She lived on the outskirts of the village, away from human eyes, and rarely showed herself in public. She was considered a bearer of ancient knowledge and a soothsayer whose word carried weight in the village. She was famous for her spells and rituals, which, as the inhabitants believed, could either protect the village or bring a curse on it. Many came to her for advice and protection, and her opinion had great power over the residents. When Nagoma found out about Bakari's return, she took it as an extremely dangerous sign. In her opinion, this boy who appeared out of the water was the embodiment of an ancient curse capable of destroying everything she knew and valued. She believed that his appearance was a prediction of trouble, and was sure that if he was not stopped, then everything in the village would go downhill. The sorceress feared that Bakari's powers were not from good spirits, but from evil ones, and that his magic could turn against the village. Nagoma began to perform rituals in her home, trying to understand the nature of Bakari and how to banish him. She lit bonfires, whispered ancient incantations, and appealed to the spirits, hoping to find a way to protect the village from someone she considered a threat. Her fear and distrust of Bakari grew by the day, and soon she began openly calling for his expulsion. At first, her words did not resonate with most of the villagers. Those who saw Bakari return water to the river and help people were sympathetic to him. But as Nagoma spread her fears and prophecies about the coming troubles, an atmosphere of anxiety and tension began to grow in the village. People who had previously seen Bakari as a savior began to doubt whether he had brought danger with him. Nagoma did not stop at the calls for exile. She began to prepare rituals for the exile, collecting herbs, stones, and amulets, which, in her opinion, were supposed to protect the village from Bakari. The witch assured him that his powers could upset the balance between the human world and the spirit world, and that if he was not expelled, it would lead to disaster. Nagoma used her influence, and more people began to listen to her words. The fear of the unknown, of the fact that Bakari could hide danger in himself, began to penetrate the hearts of the villagers. Some began to avoid him, others openly expressed their dissatisfaction. Rumors and speculation began to arise in the village, which increased the atmosphere of tension and disagreement. But along with those who began to fear Bakari, there were also those who remained on his side. They saw how he helped the village and believed that his appearance was a blessing. These people were trying to protect him and convince the others that Nagoma was wrong. They believed that the powers he possessed were a gift, not a curse, and that he could bring more good to the village than evil. However, the confrontation became more and more obvious. The two camps, Bakari's supporters and those who saw him as a threat, began to clash with each other. Tension was growing in the village, and no one could remain indifferent to what was happening. People discussed Bakari in the streets, at meetings and in their homes, and gradually the village began to divide into two opposing camps. Nagoma, feeling that her words were gaining more and more supporters, began to prepare for the decisive step. She gathered all those who believed in her prophecies, and together they went to the center of the village to demand the expulsion of Bakari. Their faces were full of determination, and in their hands they carried amulets and protection symbols made by Nagoma. The whole village gathered to watch this confrontation. Bakari, seeing this crowd, felt that the moment of truth had come. He knew that he would have to face those who considered him a threat, and that the future of not only himself, but the entire village depended on his actions. He realized that his power, which had seemed good before, had now become a source of fear and distrust. Nagoma, standing in front of the audience, began to speak. Her voice was full of passion and determination. She accused Bakari that his appearance had led to a disturbance, that his forces were threatening the village, and that he should be expelled before it was too late. Her words resonated in the hearts of those who had already begun to fear Bakari, and cheers rang out in the crowd. But there were also those who opposed Ngoma, defending Bakari and claiming that he did not pose a threat, but on the contrary, could save the village. These people tried to convince the others that Ngoma was mistaken, and that the expulsion of Bakari would lead to even greater troubles. In response, Ngoma intensified her accusations, claiming that if he was not expelled now, the village would be destroyed. The tension reached its peak, and it seemed that the confrontation was about to escalate into an open conflict. At that moment, Bakari realized that he had to take control of the situation. He realized that his further actions would determine not only his fate, but also the fate of the entire village. After the confrontation reached its peak, the atmosphere in the village remained tense. Ngoma and her supporters demanded Bakari's expulsion, claiming that his presence was a source of future troubles. While the group supporting Bakari tried to keep the peace and protect it from the witch, fear and suspicion continued to tear apart the community. But in the midst of all this turmoil, the terrible event became only a matter of time. Villagers noticed that the water in the river, which had recently started flowing again, had become muddy and stormy. This caused fear, since the previous years of drought and water shortages are still fresh in the memory. There were also rumors of an impending natural disaster that could destroy everything they had managed to rebuild. Bakari, despite all his fear and distrust, felt a powerful inner urge. He knew that his powers and knowledge acquired among the mermaids were not just a gift, but also a responsibility. Realizing that not only his future, but also the future of the entire village depends on his actions, he decided to use his abilities to prevent the impending danger. He went to the river, where the muddy waters were beginning to gain strength. The water continued to boil and bubble, and Bakari felt that this was a harbinger of a much more serious threat. His task was not only to calm the river, but also to protect the village from a possible catastrophic event. With each step he approached the river, plunging his hands into its swirling waters, focusing his will on harmonizing the elements. Bakari knew that his ability to control the elements of water was the key to averting disaster. He used his powers to calm the water, directing its movement and controlling the force of the current. It wasn't easy. The river resisted, as if trying to test its limits. He could feel his energy draining away, and he needed to keep his concentration in order not to let the elements take over. Those who believed in him and supported him came to his aid. They began to help him with the rituals using their own skills and knowledge. Together they worked to restore balance in the river and prevent a disaster. Gradually the muddy waters began to calm down, and the river began to flow again with a calm, confident flow. Bakari felt the elements yielding to his will, and this gave him the strength to continue. Meanwhile, Ngoma was watching from a distance. Her fear and doubts gradually began to recede when she saw how Bakari and his supporters were handling the situation. She noticed that the river had been stabilized, and this caused her internal fluctuations. She couldn't deny that Bakari and his powers had really helped the village, and that was starting to change her opinion of him. When the danger was eliminated, the villagers began to realize the true scale of the threat they could have avoided. They saw that Bakari was not just a young man with special abilities, but also a true defender, able to prevent disasters and use his powers for good. His actions proved that his powers were not a curse, but a gift that could serve protection and prosperity. Bakari, despite his satisfaction that he had managed to avert the catastrophe, knew that something more was needed to finally unite the two worlds. He began to actively work to establish peace and harmony between humans and mermaids. He used his knowledge of magic and nature to explain to the villagers the essence of mermaids and their world. At the same time, he conveyed to the mermaids an understanding of the human world and its values. Gradually, a bond began to form between humans and mermaids. Bakari organized meetings and negotiations, helping the two sides to understand and respect each other. People began to realize that mermaids were not a threat, but a part of their world that could and should be integrated. The mermaids saw people as allies and partners, not enemies. Bakari soon became a bridge between the two worlds, able to unite them. He established regular contacts and cooperation between the village and the underwater kingdom. People began to learn about nature, magic and protection from mermaids, and mermaids began to learn about human traditions and culture. This cooperation brought many benefits to both sides, and life in the village and underwater began to improve. Ngoma, Watching the peace between humans and mermaids being established also changed her mind. She admitted that her fears were unjustified and began working with Bakari and his supporters to help integrate magical knowledge and traditions into the life of the village. It was not an easy process, but the results were obvious. The peace and prosperity that came to the village due to the unification of the two worlds became evidence that change is possible and necessary. Bakari, in turn, has found his place in the world. He not only became a link between the two worlds, but also became a symbol of a new beginning, a new understanding, and a new cooperation. His life, which began with a tragedy, ended with successful integration and the creation of harmony between humans and mermaids. He continued to work on strengthening ties and maintaining peace, knowing that his mission had been accomplished, but that the work of uniting and harmonizing the two worlds would never end.